Okay, so we are moving on to Unit 6, Lesson 2. This lesson is going to specifically talk about the election of 1860. The election of 1860 is what spurs the South to secede, which means to break away from the United States of America and attempt to form their own country, which will begin the American Civil War. So, your lesson objectives, you're going to explain the rise of the Republican Party and the emergence of Abraham Lincoln. You're going to explain the importance of 1860 in the election. You can describe how the South responded to the results of the election. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the first battle of the Civil War. So again, you have your video you're watching now. It's not part one. There's only one part for this lesson. And then your guided notes. For your should do, we're going to do a little map coloring activity. More to say on that. I will have that on paper for you. We're going to do a mastery check on paper as we usually do. So, the election of 1860 is the year that Abraham Lincoln is elected to be president of the United States. His famous quote leading up to his election is "A house divided against itself cannot stand." So he's referring to the country as a whole and the fact that obviously they're very divided at this moment in time. And if you have a house divided, that it cannot survive. He also said, "As I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master." This expresses my idea of democracy. So, our lesson objectives, as I already went over, here they are again for you to review so you know what to have prepared for your mastery check. So, let's review. When we looked at Unit 6, Lessons 1, Part 1, and Part 2, we looked at the causes leading up to the war so far. We looked at the economic and social differences between the North and the South. We looked at states versus federal rights under the Constitution. We talked about the fight between slave and non-slave proponents. And then we talked about the rise of the abolitionist movement, which was the movement to end slavery led by people like Frederick Douglass. So in 1858, Lincoln runs for Senate in the state of Illinois against Stephen Douglas. Even though he doesn't defeat Douglas for the Illinois Senate seat, this actually propels himself into a more national reputation. People followed the debates between Lincoln and Douglas as they traveled around the state of Illinois, and he made clear what this new Republican Party was all about. So his principles, as I explained, a house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. So he's predicting in 1858 that he doesn't think the Union will fall apart, but he does know that we're either going to, it's decision time. Are we having slavery everywhere or are we not having slavery at all? So in 1860, this is what the map of the United States looks like. The tan or orange color that you see here, those are the states that are free states that have no slavery. And then the darker orange, those are the slave states. So you can see most of the free states are in the North and the West. And then most of the slave states are in the South. The part in the middle there, those are parts of the United States. They're just right now unorganized territories. So the election of 1860, there are 4 people that run for president. The Republican Party is new and they nominate Abraham Lincoln. He's their most famous person. The Democrats, however, split. There are Democrats in the North and there are Democrats in the South. So the Northern Democrats, they nominate Stephen Douglas. As I said, he was a senator from Illinois. The Southern Democrats nominate John C. Breckinridge. The Constitutional Union Party, which is pretty much the Southerners, choose John Bell. He is a moderate who wanted to keep the Union together. Lincoln will be elected as president. Kentuckian John C. Breckinridge is elected as vice president, had served as vice president. Sorry, he's a presidential candidate. I just want you guys to pay attention to this is like the early days of photography. So it was a very new technology and everybody pretty much looked like a ghost. So you can see here, and remember, how we elect a president is based on the electoral votes. So the colors you see here are who how many electoral votes um, each candidate received. So you can see that Breckinridge swept the South. John Bell, who was the moderate, remember, he's kind of the border states. Those are the states that are in between the North and the South. Stephen Douglas only wins Missouri and New Jersey. But you can see overwhelmingly, Lincoln wins most of the northern states. And again, that was where the most people lived. The highest number of population was in the North at this time due to larger cities, industry. So overwhelmingly, Lincoln wins the election. So the South reacts to this. The South sees this result and believes that they no longer have a voice. They realize that the North now, at this point, with the way the population is and the way the Electoral College works, that they will no longer have the ability to ever have a president that represents them. So now they need to make a decision. Um, they try to the very last minute. Senator John Crittenden of Kentucky makes a last effort for another compromise, proposing a constitutional amendment which would guarantee slavery where it already existed, but this fails. So, South Carolina in December 1860 decides that they cannot exist in a country where Abraham Lincoln is their president. So they are the first state to secede. To secede means to break away from the Union. So South Carolina says, peace out. We're not a part of the United States anymore. We're going to go form our own country. They are followed by Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. They form a new nation named the Confederate States of America and elect Jefferson Davis to be their first president. So, the major thing when we're talking about states' rights and federal rights, did the states have a right to secede? Uh, Abraham Lincoln and the Constitution says no, but at this point, the southern states say that they do, so they leave. So, you have a map here again, the free states, slave states, kind of just looking at 1860. So the Civil War begins. When Lincoln takes office, he says in his inaugural address, "In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection." So he's saying to the Southerners, if you choose to start a civil war, that's on you. I'm asking you not to do that. This is not my fault. So what does he mean here? Just what I said, right? It would be the responsibility of the South, not the North, if a civil war comes. So a civil war is a war between people of the same country. So this is the American Civil War, but there have been civil wars in many countries around the world. There are still civil wars happening in countries today. So the first battle of the Civil War will take place in Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter is a fort in Charleston, South Carolina's harbor. There are Union troops. From now on forward, when you hear the word Union, I'm referring to the Northern troops or the United States troops. The Confederate troops are the Southern troops. So there were Union Northern troops in Fort Sumter. It was owned by the United States, and the Confederates demand that Fort Sumter be surrendered. The Union does not. The Confederates open fire when Lincoln is forced to try to restock the fort with goods, foods, resources for the soldiers, but the Confederates assume they're stocking them with weapons. So the Confederates open fire. The Union is forced to surrender the fort, but this is the beginning of the Civil War. With the Battle of Fort Sumter, 4 more states join the Confederacy. Arkansas, Tennessee, Virginia, and North Carolina. So I have a short video here. After you complete your notes, you'll do the map activity, and then we will do our mastery check. Okay, so again, we will finish our guided notes. If you have any questions, please let me know. And our next lesson, sorry, our next lesson will be about the major events of the Civil War.